poor market girl found a billionaire's wallet stuffed with $4,700 in cash. She could have kept it. Nobody was watching. Nobody would have known. That money would have paid her grandmother's dialysis bills, cleared 2 months of her dead father's hospital debt, and bought her brother the school supplies he'd been too proud to ask for. She kept none of it. She wrapped that wallet in a cloth, got on a city bus in her worn canvas shoes and her dead mother's oversized jacket, walked into the most powerful building in Cincinnati, and handed it back, every dollar untouched, to a billionaire who didn't even know he'd lost it. And that single decision, that one quiet, uncelebrated act of honesty that the whole world missed, changed her life forever. But here is what nobody tells you about stories like this. The billionaire didn't just get his wallet back that morning. He got something no amount of money had been able to buy him back since the day he buried his wife. He felt something. And when a man like Nathan Hargrove feels something, the kind of man whose name is carved into the very street the market stands on, the world around that feeling does not stay still. So ask yourself this. What does a billionaire do when a poor market girl refuses his money, walks away without asking for anything, and is the first person in 3 years to see him before she sees his name? What happens to a woman who has been surviving on $40 a Sunday and borrowed hair ties? When power, wealth, and a man who cannot stop thinking about her come knocking on her market stall? And what happens when the people who were supposed to love that billionaire decide that a girl from Hargrove Street is a problem that needs to be eliminated? Stay with this story, because Mae Carter returned a wallet, and what she got back was a whole new life. The sun hadn't fully risen over Hargrove Street when Mae Carter was already on her feet. Cincinnati's outdoor market breathed slowly in the early morning, wooden stalls creaking against the October chill, vendors dragging crates across cracked asphalt, the smell of raw onions and damp earth rising together like a prayer that the neighborhood had been repeating for decades. Most people on Lily's block considered 5 o'clock in the morning an act of violence against the human body. Lily considered it a head start. She was 24 years old, medium height, lean in the way that comes not from a gym membership but from real labor, the kind of body that has been useful every single day of its life. Her hands were rough at the knuckles and careful in their movements, the hands of someone who had learned early that things break if you aren't paying attention. Her face was the kind of face that didn't announce itself, no makeup, no performance, but held your attention once you were looking, the way a still river holds your eye longer than a loud one. She wore her late mother's green jacket. Sandra Carter had bought it second-hand from a church sale 11 years ago, and it had been too big for her even then, oversized, olive green, faded at both elbows, the left pocket torn along the seam. Lily had sewn it shut with yellow thread because that was the only color she could find in Grandma Ruth's sewing tin. She didn't wear it because it was warm enough. She wore it because on the mornings when the weight of everything felt like it might finally win, she could pull that collar up and something steady moved through her, something that smelled faintly of her mother's hand lotion and felt like being held. Her hair was pulled back with a rubber band she'd found on the ground 3 days ago near the bus stop. She owned a proper hair tie. She was saving it for a reason she hadn't fully defined yet. Maybe some part of her understood even then that a better day was coming and she would want something new for it. Her stall was modest in the way that honest things are modest, not ashamed, simply undecorated. A rectangular wooden table her father Ronald had built 12 years ago in the narrow backyard of their Delmont Street house, sanded smooth and painted green, though neither of them had decided on that color together. It had just been the only paint in the garage, and Ronald Carter had laughed when he noticed it matched Sandra's jacket, and Sandra had cried a little, and Lily, 12 years old and standing in sawdust, had decided that green was her favorite color from that afternoon forward, Ronald Carter. The thought of him moved through Lily the way cold air moves through a house with a broken window. You couldn't stop it. You just learned to keep moving so it didn't settle on you. He had died 8 months ago. Heart attack, 51 years old. It happened on a Wednesday morning while he was making coffee, and by the time the ambulance arrived there was nothing left to save. He had been an accountant once, a genuinely skilled one, the kind of man who could read a financial statement the way a musician reads a score, hearing things others missed. He had worked for a mid-sized firm downtown for 11 years before the medical bills started. First Sandra's cancer diagnosis, then the treatment. Then the slow, ruinous arithmetic of keeping someone alive in a country that charges for the privilege. By the time Sandra died 6 years ago, quietly in the back bedroom on a Tuesday in March, Ronald had spent his savings, cashed his retirement, and borrowed from everyone who would lend to a man too proud to ask twice. He never recovered financially, but he never once made Lily feel like she was part of the problem. On the contrary, in the evenings after the market closed and Damon was doing homework at the kitchen table, Ronald would sit beside Lily and teach her numbers, patterns, the way money moved through systems and the places it tried to hide. "Baby," he told her once, 3 months before he died, his voice carrying the particular softness of a man who senses his time is shorter than he's admitting. "Money is just a language, and you already know how to speak." She hadn't understood the full weight of that sentence then. She would. He left behind $14,200 in hospital debt, his own, accumulated in his final year when his heart had been sending warnings he'd chosen to interpret as stress. He left a roof that leaked above the kitchen and above Damon's bedroom when the rain came from the east. He left Damon, 17, bright, angry in the specific way of young men who are smart enough to understand their circumstances, but not yet old enough to see past them. And he left Grandma Ruth, 74 years old, sharp enough to cut glass, kidneys failing steadily, who needed dialysis 3 times every week at a cost that made Lily's jaw tighten every time she ran the numbers on Sunday nights. Lily worked the market 6 days a week. On Sundays, she cleaned 3 floors of the Brennan office complex downtown alone, 4 hours, $40. She sold fresh vegetables from her backyard garden and a cousin's small farm 30 minutes outside the city. And she made pepper sauce 6 varieties, each one built from a recipe that had lived in Grandma Ruth's memory for 40 years and had never been written down until Lily sat Ruth down one evening with a notebook and said, "We're writing it down tonight. All of it." Ruth had laughed. "You act like I'm about to die." Lily had not laughed. She'd uncapped her pen. The sauce was remarkable. Customers who tried it once came back every week. 3 of them had told her she should bottle it commercially, get it into stores. She smiled each time and said, "Someday." But even as she said it, something behind her eyes was already calculating shelf life, labeling costs, distribution, logistics, the way her father had taught her to think. Someday was doing a lot of heavy lifting in Lily Carter's life, but unlike most people's somedays, hers had a business plan forming quietly underneath it. She never complained about any of it. Not because the weight wasn't real, it was immense, pressing, the kind of weight that wakes you at 3 in the morning and sits on your chest until dawn. But complaining required energy. And energy was a resource Lily managed with the precision of someone who understood scarcity in the most personal possible way. Her neighbor, Mrs. Patton, a warm, wide woman who smelled perpetually of fried plantain and eucalyptus oil, had told her once, leaning over the fence with the authority of a woman who had survived 3 husbands and a flood, "Baby, you work too hard for a woman with no husband." Lily had smiled without stopping what she was doing. "The work doesn't ask about my husband, Mrs. Patton." What the entire Hargrove Street market had come to accept as simple fact about Mae Carter was this: she had a habit, small, automatic, as natural to her as breathing. Whenever anyone dropped anything in her vicinity, a coin, a receipt, a grocery list, a glove, a child's dropped snack, she called after them or chased them down, without fail, without exception, without any calculation of whether it was worth her time. She had sprinted half a block after a man for a crumpled $5 bill he didn't know he'd lost. She had held a stranger's toddler's toy for 40 minutes, standing at her stall with it in her hand like a flag, until the frantic mother circled back with tears already forming. Damon had teased her about it with the casual cruelty that only younger siblings can deploy. You'd return a dropped napkin to a stranger. If it was theirs, she'd said, not looking up from her tomatoes. Grandma Ruth, standing in the kitchen doorway in her house slippers, had smiled slowly, the smile of a woman watching something she planted a long time ago finally breaking through the ground. I taught her that. You return what isn't yours, always. God watches what you do when nobody's looking. Damon had executed the mandatory teenage eye roll, but he had never once dropped anything without picking it up since. And that was the thing about the lessons Grandma Ruth planted. They took root even in people who pretended not to be listening. It was 7:38 in the morning when the black SUV appeared. It materialized at the outer edge of the market with the quiet wrongness of a thing that had arrived in the wrong world entirely, moving slowly along the cracked perimeter road like it wasn't sure the ground could hold it. Spotless black paint, windows dark enough to suggest that whatever was inside preferred not to be seen. The kind of vehicle that didn't have a price so much as it had a category. The category of things that poor people admire briefly before returning to work. Lily noticed it the way she noticed most things that didn't belong, quickly, without making it obvious she was paying attention, filing it away without making it mean anything yet. The back door opened. The man who stepped out wore a charcoal suit that had been cut for his body specifically. The kind of tailoring that doesn't advertise itself but makes every other suit in the room look like a costume. He was 32 years old, though he carried himself with the compressed authority of someone who had been making decisions with real consequences since his mid-20s. Tall, sharp jaw set hard, dark eyes that moved over the environment with the automatic assessment of a man who was always, on some level, calculating. His phone was already at his ear before both feet were on the ground. His name was Nathan Hargrove IVS Hargrove, the same name on the street sign rusting above Lily's stall. Not a coincidence, a history. Nathan's great-grandfather, a real estate developer named Ellis Hargrove, had owned 40% of this district in the 1940s before the city reclaimed it as a public market zone. The Hargrove name remained on the street long after the family's ownership had dissolved. The way powerful names tend to linger even after the power has moved on to newer addresses. Nathan had never once visited this market. He didn't know his great-grandfather's name was still on the sign. He had been rerouted here this morning because a water main break on 5th had closed his usual route, and his driver had needed 5 minutes to check a warning light on the dashboard. And Nathan had stepped out because he did not wait inside vehicles for things he could pace through outside. He was, at this particular moment, in the middle of a conversation about a merger, the Voss-Hargrove commercial real estate consolidation that had been in negotiation for 14 months and was currently threatening to collapse over a clause that Nathan considered insulting and his partner Elliot Voss considered non-negotiable. Nathan's voice was low, controlled, precise. He was not a man who raised his voice in arguments. He was the kind of man who became quieter as his position hardened, which people who didn't know him read as flexibility and people who knew him read as the warning it was. He walked 2 stalls down from where Lily stood. His jacket pocket, the outer left one, where he'd pushed his wallet loosely after paying for an espresso 40 minutes ago, had a shallow opening, and the wallet, thin and heavy with cash and cards, tilted once and then simply fell. It landed between 2 wooden produce crates without a sound. Nathan didn't feel it go. His attention was locked on the call, his jaw tight, his free hand moving in a gesture that served no audience. He turned, walked back to the SUV, got in. The door closed with the quiet, definitive sound of expensive engineering, and the vehicle pulled away from Hargrove Street Market as smoothly as it had arrived. Lily had seen the exact moment it fell. She set down the tomato she was holding, walked to the crates, crouched down and picked the wallet up with both hands. She did not look around to see if anyone was watching. The thought of taking it did not pass through her mind as a temptation. It arrived and departed in under a second, not because she was fighting it, but because it wasn't really a thought at all. It was the same reflex that made her call after strangers with dropped receipts. Some things are just not yours. The knowing of that was in her bones. She opened it carefully, holding it the way she would hold something borrowed. The cash was crisp and ordered, $4,700 in banded 50s and 100s. 3 black credit cards, the kind with no numbers printed on the front. A driver's license. And the photograph. It was folded once, carefully, the fold line soft and white from being opened and closed many times. A little girl, 5 years old or thereabouts, in a yellow dress that looked like it had been chosen by someone who loved her very specifically. She was laughing, not performing laughter, but really laughing, the full-body kind that closes your eyes and tilts your head back. Behind her was the blurred suggestion of a backyard and sunlight. Lily held the photograph for a long moment. She had not meant to feel anything. She had meant to simply find the name and go. But the photograph took her somewhere else, back to the morning at the hospital when the nurse had handed her a small plastic bag containing her father's belongings. His watch, his keys, his worn leather wallet, and she had unzipped that bag and reached past the watch and the keys and taken the wallet first, opened it first, and found the small laminated photograph of 7-year-old Lily missing her 2 front teeth, grinning at a camera her father was holding. She had stood in that hospital hallway holding that photograph and understood for the first time that he was truly gone, because the photograph was now in her hands instead of his, and that meant he was never reaching for it again. She closed the wallet. Her throat was tight in a way she controlled immediately, the practiced compression of someone who does not allow themselves to come apart in public. She looked at the license. Nathan A. Hargrove. 14 Meridian Tower, Cincinnati. She had heard of Meridian Tower. Everyone in Cincinnati had heard of Meridian Tower, 41 stories of glass and steel at the intersection of 4th and Madison, the headquarters of Hargrove Capital Group, a privately held real estate and investment empire valued. According to the last Business Journal article she'd seen someone reading on the bus, at somewhere north of $2 billion. She wrapped the wallet in the soft cloth she used to buff her sauce jars, placed it in her bag beside the 2 pepper sauce jars she was planning to drop at Della's kitchen on the way back. Gonna return it, aren't you? Damon's voice came from behind her, not a question, but a statement delivered with the tone of someone confirming a weather forecast they already knew was bad. He had arrived while she was reading the license, school backpack on, hoodie pulled up, holding a breakfast biscuit from the corner store that was already half-eaten. Lily didn't answer. She zipped her bag. "That's like $4,000 in there," Damon said. $4,700, she said. "Lily, watch the stall. I have school in 50. I'll be back before you leave," she said. "Watch the stall, Damon." He looked at her for a moment, this older sister of his, in their mother's too-big jacket, with a rubber band in her hair and worn-out shoes, carrying another man's wallet across the city like it was a responsibility she'd been assigned rather than a choice she was making. He wanted to argue. He had the words for it. But he'd been watching Lily Carter his whole life, and he understood at 17 that there were some things about her that weren't up for debate. Her honesty was one of them. It was not a virtue she performed. It was a structure she was built from, the way a house is built from its foundation up, invisible from the outside but holding everything above it in place. "Fine," he said, and bit his biscuit. Lily walked toward the bus stop without looking back. She didn't change her clothes. She didn't stop to fix her hair. She didn't consider, even briefly, that she was about to walk into one of the most powerful buildings in Ohio, dressed the way she dressed every morning to sell vegetables. She saw no reason to. She was returning something that didn't belong to her. That required honesty, not a wardrobe. The number 12 bus arrived in 4 minutes. She got on, found a window seat, held her bag in her lap, and watched Hargrove Street disappear behind her as the bus moved downtown. Somewhere in that bag, wrapped in a polishing cloth, a little girl in a yellow dress was waiting to be returned to the man who carried her everywhere. Lily looked out the window at the city moving past. She didn't know yet that the city was about to look entirely different from the other side. Meridian Tower did not welcome you. It assessed you. That was the feeling Lily registered the moment she stepped through the revolving glass doors. A vast, cool lobby that seemed specifically engineered to remind a person of their precise position in the social order. The floor was white Italian marble veined with gray, polished to a mirror shine. The ceiling rose 40 feet above it. 2 security desks flanked the entrance like sentry posts, staffed by men in charcoal uniforms who wore their authority the way the building wore its glass, reflective, impersonal, designed to show you yourself rather than let you in. The lobby was populated, at 8:15 in the morning, by people moving with the coordinated purpose of those who had somewhere important to be, women in structured blazers with laptops under their arms, men in conversation that continued without pause from the revolving door to the elevator bank. Everyone carried the same invisible credential, the absolute certainty that they belonged here. Lily walked in wearing a dead woman's jacket and canvas shoes with a worn toe. She walked in like she belonged there anyway. One of the security guards, broad, professional, with the practiced neutrality of a man who had intercepted hundreds of people who didn't have appointments, stepped toward her before she'd crossed a third of the lobby. "Good morning, ma'am. This is a private building. Do you have an appointment?" "No," Lily said, "but I have his wallet." Guard's expression moved briefly toward the almost smile of someone who hears creative excuses daily. "A lot of people come in here with Nathan Hargrove," Lily said. "His license is inside. There's $4,700 in cash and a photograph of a little girl in a yellow dress." Almost smile disappeared. The guard looked at her for 2 seconds, recalibrating. Then he held up one finger and reached for his radio. Lily stood in the middle of that marble lobby and waited. She did not shift her weight or look around at the grandeur of the place or check her reflection in the polished floor, the way she suspected the building expected her to. She stood the way she stood at her stall, straight, still, hands loose at her sides, and watched the elevator numbers above the bank of doors the way she might watch the weather. Nathan Hargrove, on the 31st floor, was 8 minutes into a rescheduled briefing with his acquisitions team when his assistant Claire, 28, organized to the point of severity, loyal to the point of sacrifice, appeared at the glass door of the conference room and knocked once. He looked up. She pushed the door open 2 inches. "I'm sorry to interrupt. Security is asking you to come down to the lobby. Them to handle it. They say a woman came in with your wallet, sir." "She says there's a photograph." Claire paused, reading something from a slip of paper she was holding. "Of a little girl in a yellow dress." Nathan was out of his chair before Claire finished the sentence. 40 seconds later, the elevator opened on the lobby, and he crossed the marble floor in a straight line, not jogging, but close to it. The movement of a man whose composure is working harder than usual. Lily watched him come. She had not expected him to come down himself. She had expected an assistant, a handler, someone whose job was to receive things on his behalf. The fact that he came himself that quickly told her something about the photograph, confirmed what she had already suspected when she saw the soft, handled fold of it. He stopped in front of her. Up close he was sharper than he had been at the market, the suit more present, the authority more visible. But there was something else visible too, something that the controlled jaw and the measuring eyes were working to contain. Something that looked briefly and unmistakably like relief. He took the cloth-wrapped wallet from her hands, opened it, checked systematically, quickly, cash, cards, and then the photograph, and something in his posture shifted when he found it intact, a barely perceptible settling like a building returning to its foundation after a tremor. He looked up at her. "You didn't take anything." "It wasn't mine to take." He looked at her with an attention that was different from the way powerful men usually looked at women who had done something useful for them, the distracted appreciation, the already reaching for the checkbook quality. He was actually looking at her, reading her the way he read balance sheets, looking for the real number behind the presented figure. "Most people would have kept the cash," he said. "Most people aren't my grandmother's granddaughter." Something moved through his expression, quick, real, gone in under a second. The audience sees it. Lily doesn't. He opened the wallet again and removed $500, folded it once, and extended it toward her with the clean efficiency of a man for whom this was a simple transaction. "For your trouble." Lily looked at the money, then at his hand, then at his face. "I didn't come here for a reward, Mr. Hargrove. Consider it compensation for your time." "I came," she said, with the patient precision of someone explaining something simple to someone intelligent enough to understand it immediately. Because there was a little girl's picture in there, and somebody was probably looking for it. His hand, still extended, lowered slowly. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't fully classify, not the face of a man being refused, but the face of a man who has been surprised in a room he thought he'd secured. "How did you know that mattered?" he said. "The photograph. Because my father kept a photo of me in his wallet. He never went anywhere without it." She said it evenly, no performance, just fact. "When he died, it was the first thing I took out." Nathan Hargrove, who had not been genuinely caught off guard in a professional setting in 7 years, who had sat across tables from senators and sovereign wealth fund managers and walked away with the better deal every single time, had absolutely nothing to say. The conference room full of his acquisitions team was 31 floors above them. The merger was unresolved. The morning was moving past him. He noticed none of it. What the audience knows, and what Lily does not yet know, is what that photograph actually represents. Nathan's daughter, Ava, was 5 years old. Her mother, Nathan's wife, Diana Hargrove, née Calloway, had died 2 years ago in a car accident on I-75, a Tuesday afternoon in November, 4 miles from home. She'd been returning from picking Ava up from preschool. The other driver ran a red light. Ava survived with a broken collarbone. Diana did not survive at all. Nathan had stood at Diana's funeral in the gray November rain and made 2 promises, one to Diana, one to himself. The first, that Ava would never feel motherless if he could prevent it. The second, that he would not fall apart because falling apart was a luxury that men with 5-year-old daughters could not afford. He had kept both promises. Functionally, he was operationally intact. His company had posted record returns in both years since Diana's death. He attended Ava's school events. He read to her at night. He was present in all the measurable ways, but grief that is never released does not disappear. It settles into the foundation of a person, invisible and structural, changing the load-bearing capacity of everything above it. The people in his boardroom had noticed in the past 2 years that Nathan Hargrove had become unreachable in some specific way, brilliant, capable, formidable, but sealed. A high-performance machine running on precision rather than fire. The photograph of Ava was the only soft object he carried. He had not told anyone that. He had not needed to. It was private in the way that a man's truest vulnerabilities are always private. Not hidden exactly, just held very still, in the hope that stillness will look like strength. And this woman, in a faded green jacket, holding a brown paper bag, speaking without any calculation of effect, had understood the photograph's importance in the same 30 seconds that his own executive team, who had known him for years, had never thought to ask about. "What's your name?" he said. Lily Carter. "Do you work nearby, Lily Carter, Hargrove Street Market?" A pause that was almost, but not quite, nothing. "You dropped the wallet near my stall." He absorbed this. Hargrove Street. The name of the market district his great-grandfather had built and his family had long since stopped thinking about. He had been rerouted there by a water main break, stepped out of a car for 4 minutes, and somehow the one person in that market who would return the wallet without taking a single bill was the person standing in front of him. He did not believe in coincidence. He believed in data, and this felt like data he didn't have a category for yet. He stopped. Started again, which was itself unusual. Nathan Hargrove did not start sentences over. "Would you allow me to at least have a car take you back? You've given up your morning." "I have a bus to catch," Lily said. "My driver can." "I don't need your car, Mr. Hargrove." She picked up her brown paper bag from the marble floor where she'd set it. She looked at him one final time, direct, unhurried, the look of someone who has said what needed to be said and considers the transaction complete. "I hope she makes you smile," Lily said. The little girl, she walked to the elevator. The doors opened as if they'd been waiting for her. She stepped in, turned to face forward. The doors closed on a woman in a faded green jacket, and Nathan Hargrove stood alone in the center of his own lobby, $4,700 in recovered cash in his hand, his daughter's photograph safe, his entire morning scheduled, and felt, for the first time in 2 years, the specific warmth of something beginning. He stood there until Claire appeared at his elbow. The acquisitions team is. Find out which restaurant she was delivering to, he said. Claire blinked. I'm sorry, the brown bag she was carrying. She mentioned a drop-off. Find out where. He was already walking to the elevator. And pull everything on a Mae Carter, Hargrove Street market vendor, early 20s. Claire wrote it down without asking why. She had learned in 3 years of working for Nathan Hargrove that when he said something in the quiet voice rather than the efficient one, it was not a request being made. It was a decision already arrived at. She just didn't know yet what kind of decision it was. Neither did Nathan. But 48 hours later, when the file landed on his desk, $14,200 in hospital debt, a leaking roof, a brother's unpaid tuition, a grandmother on dialysis, $40 a Sunday cleaning floors. He sat with it for a long time without moving. He thought about the brown paper bag. He thought about the rubber band in her hair. He thought about what she'd said about her father's wallet. He thought about the fact that she'd had $4,700 in her hands and had wrapped it in a cloth like something sacred and carried it across the city on a bus. He picked up his phone. Me, the account manager for Hargrove Hotel Group, he said. I want to set up a new vendor contract, specialty condiments, standing weekly order. He was not a man who acted on impulse. Every move he made had a logic chain behind it, a calculation, an intended outcome. But even as he placed the call, something beneath the calculation was running on a different fuel entirely. Something that had been dormant in him for 2 years and was now, quietly, unmistakably, awake. The order arrived at Lily's stall on a Monday morning 3 days after her visit to Meridian Tower, delivered by a woman in a blazer who introduced herself as a procurement coordinator for the Hargrove Hotel Group, and handed Lily a contract on cream-colored paper that bore the corporate seal and smelled faintly of a printer that cost more than Lily's refrigerator. Lily read the contract twice, slowly. The way her father had taught her to read any document, first for what it said, then for what it didn't say. 50 jars of pepper sauce weekly, at a price per jar that made her recalculate the math 3 times because she kept arriving at a number that seemed unreasonable. Standing order meaning it renewed automatically unless canceled. Payment deposited within 5 business days of delivery. The client listed was Hargrove Hotel Group, Cincinnati Division. No individual name. No explanation. She looked at the procurement coordinator. Who specifically placed this order? The account is corporate, ma'am. I'm not at liberty to. Was it Nathan Hargrove? The coordinator's slight pause was its own answer. Lily held the contract for a moment. She thought about the hospital bill on the refrigerator. She thought about Grandma Ruth's next dialysis appointment 4 days away. She thought about Damon, who needed new textbooks and had been photocopying pages from a classmate's copy like it was a normal solution. She signed the contract, but she did not feel comfortable about it. And that discomfort, that small, precise alarm in her chest, was a thing she filed carefully, the way her father had taught her to file anomalies in financial documents. You don't ignore the number that doesn't fit. You watch it. That first week she made 50 jars. Every Sunday night in Grandma Ruth's kitchen, music playing low, Ruth sitting at the table snapping green beans and narrating the recipe with the authority of a woman who has never once needed to write it down. Lily wrote everything down. She always wrote everything down. The following Monday, the procurement coordinator returned. Lily had the jars crated and labeled and ready, Ruth's Fire, written in her own handwriting on paper labels she designed at the library's printer for 30 cents a sheet. Professional enough, not pretending to be more than it was. The week after that, no coordinator came. The man who came instead arrived at 7:45 a.m. in dark jeans and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows. No suit, no entourage, no phone at his ear. He walked through the market with the slightly careful attention of someone navigating new terrain, and he arrived at Lily's stall and looked at the crated jars and then at Lily and said, "Good morning." Lily looked at him for a moment without speaking. "The one buying the sauce," she said. "It's excellent sauce. You're buying 50 jars a week. My hotels have large kitchens. You came personally to pick them up. I was in the area." Lily held his gaze with the flat patience of a woman who has been managing other people's stories for her entire adult life and has developed an excellent sense for when one doesn't add up. "Mr. Hargrove," she said, "you're doing this because of the wallet." He picked up one of the jars and read the label. "I'm doing this because the sauce is genuinely good, Lily. My head chef tried the sample and requested the standing order himself." He set the jar down. "I can bring you the email if that would help." She considered him. "You could have sent a driver." "I could have," he agreed pleasantly. There was a beat of silence in which several things remained unsaid. Lily handed him the crate. He paid. He left, but he came back the following week. And the week after that. What Nathan Hargrove understood about himself, though he would not have used these words for it, was that since Diana died he had been living in a kind of controlled anesthesia. Everything managed, nothing felt. The world kept at the precise distance required to keep functioning. His therapist, whom he saw every third Tuesday and spoke to with the cooperative non-disclosure of a man who understands that the therapy is valuable in theory, had told him 18 months ago that he had intellectualized his grief to the point of paralysis, that he was running from the feeling of being human. He had nodded thoughtfully, filed the observation in the part of his mind labeled things that are probably true, and continued being unreachable. And then a woman in a faded green jacket had said I came because there was a little girl's picture in there with such uncalculated simplicity that it had moved through his anesthesia like a sound through water, not loud, not violent, but everywhere at once. He started arriving at the market earlier each week, then staying longer. He would lean against the post of her stall and talk, first about the sauce, then about the market's history, then about her grandmother, then gradually, incrementally about smaller things that had no agenda. The way the light changed over the Ohio River in November, the particular uselessness of Cincinnati traffic on Fridays, the fact that Ava had recently decided that ketchup was the enemy of all food and had been conducting a systematic campaign to eliminate it from the household. Lily listened. She also talked carefully, in the measured way of someone who has learned that what you reveal about yourself has consequences. But she noticed things. She was always noticing things. It was the Carter accounting brain applied to people rather than numbers. She noticed that he never looked at his phone while she was speaking. In a man of his stature at his scheduled density, that was not nothing. It was the equivalent in the currency of attention of a significant deposit. She noticed that he remembered details, specific ones. "How did Damon's history exam go?" asked 2 weeks after she'd mentioned it once in passing. "Is your grandmother's new dialysis schedule working better?" Reference from a single sentence she'd said while crating jars. She noticed the morning she was watching from a distance as he stopped at an elderly vendor 3 stalls down, Mr. Hins, 81 years old, whose fruit crate had tipped and sent apples rolling across the asphalt. Nathan had crouched down without hesitation, without looking around to see if anyone was watching, and picked up every apple, replaced the crate, and spent 4 minutes helping Mr. Hins restack it. Then he had bought a bag of apples he definitely didn't need and moved on. No cameras, no audience, no calculation. Lily watched it from behind her pepper sauce jars and felt something shift in her. The specific, slow movement of a wall that has been standing for a very long time and has just felt the first vibration of something worth reconsidering. She didn't say anything to him about it. She filed it in the place where she kept the things that mattered, the same place where she kept the memory of her father's voice, and the recipe in Ruth's handwriting, and the yellow thread on the left pocket of the green jacket. Then came the morning Nathan brought Ava. She appeared beside her father at 8 a.m. on a Thursday like a small explosion of concentrated personality. Red dress, white shoes already developing a scuff, brown eyes that moved over the world with the bright, assessing energy of a child who considers everything potentially interesting. She was 5 years old, and she walked with the confidence of someone who has never once doubted that she is welcome wherever she arrives. She stopped in front of Lily's stall, looked at the produce with serious deliberation, picked up a tomato, examined it at eye level, and announced, "This one looks like my teacher's nose." Lily laughed, fully, The whole body unprepared laugh that she hadn't had in so long that the sound of it surprised even her, clear and warm and absolutely genuine, breaking out of her like light through a cracked shutter. Ava stared at her. "You're pretty, are you?" Lily said. "Daddy says pretty isn't what matters." "Your daddy's right." Ava considered this with the gravity of a philosopher confirming a theorem. "He also says you're brave. What did you do that was brave?" Lily looked up at Nathan, who had the particular expression of a man caught between deep amusement and the legitimate fear of what his 5-year-old might say next. "I just returned something that wasn't mine," Lily said. Ava nodded very seriously. "Daddy says most people don't do that. People don't." "I would," Ava said, with the absolute conviction of someone who has never been tested on it but is utterly certain. "Because Grandma says God watches what you do when nobody's looking." Lily went completely still, not the stillness of composure, the stillness of a person who has just heard something that shouldn't be possible. Those were Grandma Ruth's exact words. The same sentence, the same cadence, the same quiet certainty. Said now by a 5-year-old girl with her father's jaw and her dead mother's eyes, in a red dress at a market stall on a street that bore the name of this child's great-great-grandfather. Lily looked at Ava for a long moment, and something in her chest opened, not like a door, but like a window that has been painted shut for years and someone has finally worked it free. Not romantic, not yet. Something older than that. Something that recognized, without language or logic, that this small person had just handed her something precious without knowing it. "Your grandma sounds like my grandma," Lily said softly. Ava looked at her with sudden, piercing interest. "Can I meet her?" Nathan made a sound that might have been a cough. "Maybe someday," Lily said. Ava accepted this with the practicality of someone who knows someday is real when grown-ups say it that way. She put the tomato down, picked up a different one, and resumed her produce assessment with professional focus. Nathan stepped slightly closer to Lily's side of the stall. "I apologize," he said quietly. "She doesn't have a filter." "Don't apologize," Lily said, equally quiet. "Filters are for people who are afraid of what the truth sounds like." Nathan looked at her. She was already turning back to her sauce jars, arranging them with the same efficient care she brought to everything. Hands steady, focus clean, entirely unbothered by the effect she just had on a man whose net worth was a number with 9 digits in it. Nathan Hargrove thought, standing at a wooden market stall with a bag of tomatoes in his hand, and his daughter critiquing produce beside him, that he was in very serious trouble. The good kind. The kind he hadn't felt since the first time he'd looked at Diana across a room at a fundraiser 14 years ago and thought, that one. He did not say any of this, but his executive assistant Claire, who tracked his calendar with archaeological precision, would later note that his Thursday morning market visits, originally filed as vendor relationship management, were quietly renamed in his personal calendar simply as Lily, and nobody questioned it, because nobody knew yet. Margaret Hargrove learned about the market girl on a Thursday evening. She learned it the way Margaret learned most things she wasn't supposed to know, through the network of careful observation and strategic relationship maintenance that she had spent 40 years building, and that most people in Cincinnati's upper tier simply called Margaret being informed. In practice, it meant that Margaret had a contact in her son's office building, another in his hotel group's procurement division, and a long-standing arrangement with the family's former chief of household who now worked independently and considered loyalty to Margaret a professional standard rather than an obligation. The procurement contact mentioned a standing sauce order. The household contact mentioned Thursday morning calendar entries. Margaret put both facts together over a glass of evening wine in the parlor of the Hargrove estate, a 12-bedroom Georgian revival in Hyde Park, whose maintenance alone cost more per year than most families earned, and arrived at a conclusion that she filed immediately in the category she called situations requiring attention. Margaret Hargrove was 61 years old, and had been the architect of the Hargrove family's social position for 35 of those years. She had married Nathan's father, Robert Hargrove III, at 26 with clear eyes and specific intentions, not malicious ones but precise. She had understood, entering that marriage, that wealth without maintenance dissolves, that position without protection erodes, and that the people who last in the upper tier are the ones who treat family like a portfolio, diversified, managed, protected from unnecessary risk. She had raised Nathan accordingly. She had been satisfied with Diana, not warmly, but adequately. Diana was from an acceptable family, educated, presentable, discreet. A known quantity. A market girl from Hargrove Street who sold pepper sauce was not a known quantity. She called Elliot Voss the same evening. Elliot Voss was 34 years old, Nathan's oldest friend since their years at Cincinnati Country Day School, and the Hargrove Capital Group's current business partner in a commercial real estate consolidation that had been in negotiation for 14 months. He was handsome in a way that worked harder than it let on sharp features, good suits, the cultivated ease of a man who had been told he was charming since childhood and had organized his personality around it. He was smart enough to be useful and ambitious enough to be dangerous, and Margaret had known both things about him for years and had simply decided that his ambitions, properly directed, would serve the family's interests. Elliot had his own reasons for disliking the idea of Nathan and a market girl. His cousin, Priscilla Voss, was 29, Yale-educated, impeccable. She and Nathan had been gently, persistently positioned toward each other by both Margaret and Elliot for the better part of 2 years, dinners arranged, events overlapping, conversations steered. A Voss-Hargrove marriage would complete the business merger with a structural permanence that no contract clause could achieve. It would make the consolidation not just a partnership but a dynasty. A market girl from Delmont Street ended that calculation entirely. And then there was Jade Monroe. Jade was 30 years old and operated, on the surface, as a lifestyle columnist and social philanthropist. Underneath the surface, she was a woman who had loved Nathan Hargrove at 22 with the reckless totality of someone who doesn't know yet that some loves are not designed to survive the people inside them. Nathan had chosen Diana. Jade had spent 8 years processing that fact in ways that were, depending on the week, either productive or quietly toxic. Since Diana's death, she had repositioned herself in Nathan's orbit with the patience and precision of a chess player, charity galas, mutual friends. I just happened to be at the same dinner appearances that were never accidental. She had told herself for 2 years that Nathan would eventually come back to her. That grief has a duration. That she was willing to wait it out. The market girl was not something she'd included in her projection. These 3 people, Margaret, Elliot, Jade, did not form an alliance that Thursday evening. Not formally. They didn't need to. They shared a common interest that required no signed agreement. The elimination, by whatever elegant means necessary, of Mae Carter from Nathan Hargrove's life. What none of them had done in their collective assessment of Lily as a problem was make any serious inquiry into who Lily actually was. They had looked at the surface, the market stall, the rubber band, the $40 sundaes, and concluded that they were dealing with someone easily moved. This was the most consequential mistake any of them would ever make, because while they were making plans, Mae Carter was doing what she always did. She was paying attention. She was running numbers. And she was filing things away. The Hargrove Foundation annual gala was held on the second Friday of November at the Cincinnati Art Museum, a grand neoclassical building whose wide stone steps and colonnaded entrance provided the exact backdrop that old money preferred for its public philanthropy. The event raised funds annually for urban education initiatives and was, in practice, as much a display of the city's social architecture as it was a fundraiser. The right attendance at the Hargrove Gala meant something in Cincinnati. The wrong attendance meant something too. Nathan had asked Lily 3 times before she said yes. The first time she'd said, "That's not my kind of event." The second time she'd said, "Nathan, I don't own anything appropriate for a museum gala." The third time he'd said, "Lily, I'm not asking you to wear the gala. I'm asking you to come. There's a difference." Looked at him for a moment. Then 2 days before the event, Ava had called Lily's phone. She'd gotten the number from Nathan's phone without any particular guilt about it, and said, in the direct, earnest voice of a child who does not traffic in subtext, Miss Lily, Daddy smiles different when you're there. The regular way he smiles is like this." And she made a sound Lily couldn't interpret but could somehow picture. "And the way he smiles around you is like this," and made a different sound entirely. "What does the second smile sound like?" Lily had asked, against her better judgment. "Like when I come into the room," Ava said simply. Lily had been quiet for a long time. "Be there," she said. She borrowed a dress from her neighbor's daughter Kezia in navy blue, simple cut, knee length, well made in the way of clothes that prioritize fit over ornament. She wore her mother's thin gold earring studs, the ones Sandra had been buried with a replica pair of because Lily couldn't let the originals go. She did her own hair down, natural, the specific beauty of something left to be what it actually is. She carried a small borrowed clutch. She stood in front of the narrow mirror in her bedroom on Delmont Street and looked at herself. She looked like herself, just more so. "You look like somebody," Grandma Ruth said from the doorway. "I am somebody," Lily said. Ruth smiled. "Yes, baby, that's exactly what I mean." She arrived at the Cincinnati Art Museum at 7:15 and stood at the bottom of the stone steps for exactly 3 seconds, looking up at the light spilling from the tall windows, hearing the murmur of 500 people whose combined wealth could have funded a small nation. And then she walked up the steps with the same quality she'd walked into Meridian Tower with. Like she'd decided. Nathan crossed the room to her in 12 seconds. She counted. She wasn't sure why. He was in a black tuxedo that had the same quality as his suits, designed for his body, quietly declarative. He looked at her the way he had looked at her on the day she'd walked into his lobby, the full, actually reading you attention that she had decided over the preceding weeks was one of the most disarming things about him. Men with his power typically looked at people in order to determine their utility. Nathan looked at people in order to determine their truth. "You came," he said. "I said I would." "You say a lot of things you mean," he said. "I've noticed. That's usually how meaning works," she said. He almost smiled. The second kind. The gala moved around them, champagne, speeches, the particular choreography of wealth performing its own generosity. Nathan introduced her to people whose names she recognized from business journals and news segments, and she shook hands with the specific quality of someone who is neither impressed nor dismissive. She was attentive and direct, and said exactly what she thought when asked, which made several people look at her with the slightly surprised expression of those who are unaccustomed to encountering authenticity in this zip code. Margaret Hargrove watched from across the room with the controlled stillness of a woman reserving her move. Elliot Voss watched with a smile that didn't reach the level of his eyes and spent 20 minutes keeping Priscilla Voss nearby, angled toward Nathan's sightline, available and elegant and entirely ignored. Jade Monroe watched with an emotion she classified internally as concern, and everyone else would have classified as something darker. The evening was warm and real and full of the small, accumulating moments that don't look like much individually, but are in aggregate, the way people fall for each other, a shared look over a boring speech, a quiet observation that makes the other person laugh, a moment when their hands brushed reaching for the same table and neither moved away immediately. It was near the end of the evening, as the crowd thinned toward the corridors, when Jade found her opening. She appeared at Lily's side near the restroom hallway with the fluid, unhurried grace of a woman who has planned this approach from 30 feet away. Red dress, flawless presentation, the warm, conspiratorial smile of someone about to do you a favor. "Been wanting to say hello all evening," Jade said. "I'm Jade Monroe." "Lily Carter," Lily said. "I know," Jade smiled. "Nathan talks about you." Something in that sentence was engineered to land like a compliment and function like a key. Lily registered both things simultaneously. "You seem sweet," Jade continued, her voice dropping to the intimate register of a private confidence. "And I'm going to be honest with you because I think you deserve honesty more than you deserve comfortable lies." Lily said nothing. She held her clutch and listened with the quality of attention she brought to financial documents, reading not just what was being said but what was being done. "Nathan does this," Jade said gently. "He's grieving when he's lonely. He finds someone uncomplicated, someone who makes him feel. It's real. I'm not saying it isn't real, but he always comes back to his world eventually." She gestured at the gala around them, the marble, the old money, the careful choreography of belonging. And his world, sweetheart, it was never going to be a market stall. She held Lily's gaze with the warm, final expression of a woman who believes she has just delivered a mercy. Lily looked at her. Not with hurt, not with anger, with the specific, quiet clarity of someone who has just identified exactly what they are dealing with. "Thank you for your honesty," Lily said, and walked back to Nathan. But the thing about seeds planted in careful darkness, they don't announce themselves. They don't ache immediately. They simply go in and wait, and the soil does the rest. Lily smiled. She danced once slowly with Nathan to a song she didn't know the name of. She spoke to Ava's preschool teacher, who was there as a beneficiary of the foundation and who said, unprompted, "Ava talks about you constantly. She calls you the Pepper Lady, and she means it as the highest possible compliment." And then, on the rooftop terrace at 10:15, with the Cincinnati skyline spread below them and the autumn air cold and clean, Nathan took both her hands. "I want to tell you something," he said, "and I need you to hear it clearly, okay? I haven't felt like myself since Diana died." He said her name the way people say the names of the dead when they've finally made peace with saying them with grief, but without flinching. "I've been functional, managed, operational, but not myself." A pause in which the city below them held its breath. "And then you handed me back a wallet I didn't even know I'd lost, and somehow I felt like I'd gotten back something else, something I hadn't known was missing." Lily's throat tightened with a feeling she controlled precisely. "Nathan, I'm not asking you to rush anything. I'm not asking you to change a single thing about yourself. I'm asking you to let me show up, the way you showed up at my building that morning." His hands tightened slightly over hers. "Just let me show up, Lily." She looked at him for a long, unguarded moment, this man who knelt down to pick up other people's apples when no one was watching, who remembered Damon's exam scores and Ruth's dialysis schedule, who came to a market stall in jeans instead of sending a driver because some part of him needed the stall more than the sauce. "You should know," she said quietly, "that I am not easy to get rid of once I trust someone." "Good," he said, "because I'm not interested in easy." He leaned toward her, and the night was perfect, and the city sparkled, and everything that had been broken in both of them was leaning, slowly, toward something that felt like repair. His phone rang. He glanced at the screen. His face changed. The warmth drained from it the way color drains from a face that has received news the body knew before the mind did. "Nathan," Lily said. "What's wrong?" He looked up at her. And in his eyes, those controlled, calculating, carefully managed eyes, she saw something she had not seen there before: fear. "It's about Ava," he said. "What happened to Ava that night, and what Lily overheard 3 days later in a cracked-open study door, is the match that lights part 2. Because Lily Carter did not grow up poor and load-bearing and sharp without learning one essential thing. The people who smile while they harm you are more dangerous than the ones who come at you directly. And the most dangerous thing you can do to a woman who has been quietly surviving her whole life is make her angry." Bell stopped right here. Nathan just got a call about his 5-year-old daughter. And the woman who said God watches what you do when nobody's looking is standing on a rooftop, holding his hands, watching his face go pale. You need to know what happens next. You need to know what Lily overhears. You need to know what she does with it. Subscribe to this channel right now and hit that notification bell, because part 2 is coming and it will devastate you in the best way possible. We are talking about betrayal that will make your jaw drop, revenge so precise and patient it will make you stand up, and a plot twist involving that little girl in the yellow dress that nobody will see coming. Drop a comment right now. Where are you watching this from? Tell us your city, your country, your corner of the world. We read every single one, and we want to know you are here for this story. The people who subscribe now are the ones who won't miss the moment Lily Carter stops surviving and starts winning. Part 2. The Fire Beneath the Ash, coming very soon.